Hey everyone, and a massive, warm welcome back to the channel. Seriously, it's fantastic to have you joining us today. Before we dive into this incredible journey across uncharted oceans, I'm sending the biggest, warmest wishes your way. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I genuinely hope you're feeling healthy, strong, and ready to set sail into the unknown. Take good care of yourselves. Now, picture this, it's the early 1400s. Europe is still mostly looking inward, maps fade into terrifying blank spaces labeled, "Here be dragons." But on the very edge of the continent, in a small kingdom squeezed between mountains and the mighty Atlantic Ocean, a group of determined people decide to do something audacious. They point their ships south, into waters no European has dared explore for centuries. They're not the richest, they're not the biggest, but they have an obsession, to find a sea route to the legendary riches of Asia. This is Portugal, and this is the dawn of the age of exploration. How did this tiny nation become the trailblazers of the oceans, rewriting the world map and changing the course of history forever? What drove them to risk everything on voyages that could last years into the terrifying unknown? And what was the real cost and legacy of their astonishing discoveries? Buckle up, because we're hoisting the sails and heading into the wind-swept, epic story of the Portuguese Exploration Era. Portugal in the early 15th century was a young nation, having only secured its independence from the Kingdom of Leon and Castile, Spain, a couple of centuries earlier. It was relatively poor, with limited farmland and resources. Its future seemed constrained. But it had one massive advantage, a long Atlantic coastline, facing west and south into the vast, mysterious ocean. Portuguese fishermen were already familiar with the rich waters off their shores, and sailors ventured a little way down the coast of North Africa. However, going further south was fraught with peril. Medieval maps and legends spoke of a boiling, impassable sea near the equator, inhabited by monstrous creatures. The prevailing winds and currents along the northwest African coast made sailing south incredibly difficult. Ships could sail downwind easily enough, but getting back against the wind was a major challenge. This meant voyages beyond known points were often one-way trips into oblivion. Yet, Portugal also had a powerful motivation, the lure of Asia. Spices like pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon were worth their weight in gold in Europe. They preserved food, added flavor to bland diets, and were vital for medicine. But these spices came from faraway lands like India and the Spice Islands, Indonesia, and the route to get them was long, dangerous, and controlled by middlemen. Spices traveled overland along the Silk Road, passing through countless hands, Arab merchants, Venetian traders, Ottoman empires, each taking a hefty cut, making the final price astronomical in Europe. Portugal, stuck on the western edge, was at the end of this expensive chain. Finding a direct sea route to Asia, bypassing all these middlemen, became an almost mythical goal. It promised unimaginable wealth and power for a small kingdom. There was also the fervent religious zeal of the Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to drive the Muslim Moors out of the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal had completed its own Reconquista in 1249. This crusading spirit continued. Sailing down the African coast offered the chance to contact legendary Christian kingdoms, like the mythical Prester John, believed to be fighting Muslims far to the south and east, potentially encircling their common enemy. Trade, religion, and national survival intertwined as powerful engines driving Portugal towards the sea. The man often called the architect of this era wasn't a sailor who braved the storms, but a prince who rarely left dry land, Infante Dom Enrique, better known to history as Prince Henry the Navigator. Henry was the third son of King John I of Portugal. While he didn't personally lead expeditions, his role was absolutely pivotal. After helping conquer the strategically vital Moorish port city of Ceuta in North Africa in 1415, a key event that exposed the Portuguese directly to the wealth of trans-Saharan trade routes, gold, slaves, ivory, Henry became obsessed with exploration. He established his base at Sagres, a windswept headland on Portugal's southwestern tip. While the popular image of a formal navigation school at Sagres might be overstated, Henry did create a unique center of learning and planning. He gathered around him a diverse group of experts, the best Portuguese and foreign pilots, navigators, skilled mapmakers, cartographers. From Italy and Majorca, Jewish astronomers and mathematicians who understood celestial navigation, Arab geographers with knowledge of winds and currents, and shipbuilders. Henry funded expeditions, not just for immediate profit, but to systematically gather knowledge. He wanted accurate charts, logs of winds and currents, descriptions of coastlines, and information about potential trade, allies, and enemies. His captains were under strict orders to record everything. Henry's vision was long-term and scientific. He pushed his captains further and further down the unexplored west coast of Africa, year after year, overcoming the fear of the unknown. The initial progress was slow and perilous. Sailors were terrified of sailing beyond Cape Bojador, on the coast of modern Western Sahara, believed to be the edge of the habitable world, with boiling seas and monsters. It took 15 attempts over more than a decade before Gil Eanes, sailing under Henry's patronage, finally rounded Cape Bojador in 1434. This psychological breakthrough was massive. It proved the seas beyond weren't boiling and that further exploration was possible. Henry kept pushing. His captains discovered the islands of Madeira, 1419 to 1420, and the Azores, 1427 to 1431, which became vital Portuguese settlements and supply points mid-Atlantic. They pushed further down the African coast, reaching the fertile lands beyond the Sahara, which they named Guinea. Here, they found not monsters, but opportunities, gold dust traded by local peoples, and sadly, the beginnings of a trade in enslaved Africans. While Henry died in 1460, the methodical, knowledge-driven approach he championed had become ingrained in the Portuguese exploration effort. He turned Portugal's gaze firmly towards the Atlantic and down the African coast, setting the stage for the monumental leaps to come. The success of Portugal's audacious voyages relied heavily on groundbreaking innovations in ship design and navigation. The workhorse of the early exploration was the caravel. This was a revolutionary vessel. Earlier ships, like the broad-beamed cargo Naas, carracks, or the Viking longships, weren't ideal for long voyages of exploration. The caravel was smaller, lighter, and incredibly maneuverable. Its key innovation was its rigging. It usually had 3 masts, with lateen, triangular, sails on at least 2 of them. Lateen sails allowed the caravel to sail remarkably close to the wind, meaning it could make headway against the wind by sailing at an angle, tacking back and forth. This was the crucial breakthrough that solved the problem of returning up the West African coast against the prevailing northerly winds and currents. Before the caravel, sailing south was relatively easy, getting back was nearly impossible. Now, Portuguese captains could venture further with a realistic hope of returning home. Caravels were also relatively shallow draft, allowing them to explore rivers and coastlines. They were fast and could be crewed by a relatively small number of men, around 20 to 30, making longer voyages more feasible. As voyages grew longer and ventured into more dangerous waters, larger, sturdier ships like the now carrack became more common for carrying bulk cargo and enduring ocean crossings, but the caravel remained vital for exploration and coastal work. Navigation was equally transformed. Portuguese navigators became masters of dead reckoning, calculating position based on direction sailed, using a magnetic compass, and estimated speed, measured by tossing a log overboard and timing it, the chip log. But for open ocean voyages, especially south of the equator where the North Star disappeared, they needed celestial navigation. They adopted and refined the use of the astrolabe, a metal disc used to measure the angle of the sun or stars above the horizon to determine latitude, and the simpler cross staff or kamal. They developed detailed astronomical tables, like the Alphonsine tables, and rules of thumb for sailors. Crucially, Prince Henry's cartographers meticulously compiled the information brought back by each voyage. Portolan charts, incredibly detailed maps focused on coastlines, harbors, and sailing directions, became state secrets. Each expedition built upon the knowledge of the last, gradually demystifying the Atlantic and the African coast. This systematic accumulation and refinement of nautical science was as vital as the courage of the sailors. Progress down the African coast continued steadily after Henry's death, driven now more directly by the Portuguese crown and the powerful lure of profit, particularly gold and slaves. King Afonso V and his successor, John II, were determined to find the sea route to India and tap into the sources of West African wealth. Expeditions pushed further. In 1460, Pedro de Sintra reached Sierra Leone. By the 1470s, they crossed the equator, disproving the ancient theory that the tropics were impassably hot. They established fortified trading posts, Vitorias, along the coast, like Elmina, São Jorge de Mina, in modern Ghana, founded in 1482. Elmina became the epicenter of the Portuguese gold trade, a massive castle fortress dominating the coast. It also became a central hub in the growing transatlantic slave trade, a horrific development that would have catastrophic consequences for centuries. Portuguese traders exchanged European goods, cloth, metals, horses, later guns, with African rulers and merchants for gold, ivory, Malagueta pepper, and increasingly, captured men, women, and children. While slavery existed in Africa before their arrival, the Portuguese demand, scale, and the establishment of a systematic transoceanic slave trade was new and devastating. Alongside this grim commerce, the explorers were achieving remarkable feats of seamanship. In 1482 to 1483, Diogo Chao reached the mighty Congo River and sailed some way up it, making contact with the powerful Kingdom of Congo. He erected stone pillars, padros, claiming the land for Portugal. His second voyage, 1485 to 1486, took him even further south, to Cape Cross in modern Namibia. Then came the pivotal mission. King John II, convinced Africa could be circumnavigated, sent Bartolomeu Dias in 1487 with a clear goal: sail around the southern tip of Africa and find a way into the Indian Ocean. Dias took 2 caravels and a supply ship. Battling ferocious storms for weeks, he was blown far south, past the southernmost point of Africa without realizing it. When he finally turned north, he found coastline trending northeast, not northwest. He had rounded the Cape. He sailed east for a while, landing at modern Mossel Bay and Algoa Bay, near Port Elizabeth, confirming he was in a new ocean. His terrified crew, exhausted by the storms and fearing the unknown, forced him to turn back. On the return voyage in 1488, he saw the dramatic headland he had unknowingly passed earlier, Cabo das Tormentas, the Cape of Storms. King John II, seeing the route to India now open, reportedly renamed it Cabo de Boa Esperança, the Cape of Good Hope. Dias had achieved one of history's greatest feats of navigation. The sea route to India was no longer a dream, it was a geographic certainty. Portugal was poised for its greatest leap. While Dias was making his epic voyage, King John II pursued another, more secretive avenue to the east. He sent 2 men overland, Pero de Covilhã, a fluent Arabic speaker and experienced traveler, and Afonso de Paiva. Their mission was incredibly dangerous: travel through the Mediterranean and the Middle East disguised as merchants, gather intelligence about the spice trade in India, and search for the mythical Christian kingdom of Prester John, potentially a powerful ally against Islam. Covilhã traveled extensively, reaching India, Calicut and Goa, via Aden and the Arabian Sea around 1488 to 1490. He sent detailed reports back to Lisbon about the ports, the spices, the trade routes, and the political situation, confirming the riches of the Indian Ocean trade. He then traveled to East Africa, visiting the thriving Swahili city-states like Sofala and Kilwa, which were key termini for gold coming from the African interior. Covilhã eventually made his way to the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, which Europeans associated with Prester John, where he was received well but effectively detained for the rest of his life. His vital intelligence, however, reached Lisbon, providing invaluable first-hand confirmation of what lay beyond the Cape of Good Hope and bolstering plans for the sea voyage. Meanwhile, Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor who had spent years in Portugal, proposed a radical alternative, sailing west across the Atlantic to reach Asia. He presented his plan to King John II. The Portuguese king, advised by his expert committee, rejected it. They correctly calculated Columbus had vastly underestimated the Earth's circumference and the distance west to Asia, though they also underestimated the size of the Pacific Ocean. Crucially, Portugal was already committed to the eastern route around Africa, which Diaz had just proven possible. Columbus took his idea to Spain. In 1492, with Spanish backing, he stumbled upon the Americas. This unexpected discovery by a rival power threw Portugal's plans into sharp relief. Who had the right to what? To prevent conflict, Pope Alexander VI issued decrees dividing the newly discovered and yet-to-be-discovered world between Spain and Portugal. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 formalized this, drawing a line down the Atlantic Ocean, about 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Lands discovered east of the line belonged to Portugal, lands west belonged to Spain. This gave Portugal claim to Africa, the Indian Ocean route, and crucially, the eastern part of South America, which would lead to the discovery of Brazil. With the route confirmed by Diaz, intelligence gathered by Covilhã, and their sphere of influence secured by treaty, Portugal prepared for the ultimate voyage. The task of reaching India by sea fell to Vasco da Gama, a nobleman known for his toughness and navigational skill. In July 1497, he set sail from Lisbon with a small fleet, 4 ships, including 2 carracks, the São Gabriel, his flagship, and the São Rafael, and a caravel. It was a massive undertaking, expected to last over 2 years. Da Gama took a bold route. Instead of hugging the West African coast, he sailed far out into the South Atlantic, catching the prevailing winds in a giant loop that took him perilously close to South America before swinging back east towards the Cape. This was a longer route in distance but faster due to favorable winds, demonstrating advanced understanding of Atlantic wind patterns. After months at sea, they rounded the Cape of Good Hope in November 1497. Entering the Indian Ocean, they sailed up the east coast of Africa, encountering the sophisticated Swahili trading cities like Mozambique, Mombasa, and Malindi. The reception was mixed. Local rulers were wary of these new arrivals who seemed poor in trade goods but possessed powerful ships and weapons. In Malindi, however, Da Gama found a friendly sultan who provided him with a crucial local pilot, Ahmad ibn Majid, though this identification is debated, who knew the monsoon winds across the Arabian Sea to India. Catching the southwest monsoon, Da Gama crossed the Indian Ocean in just 23 days, an astonishing feat. On May 20, 1498, they anchored off the great spice trading port of Calicut, Cojicoide, on the Malabar coast of India. Da Gama had achieved the impossible. He had found the sea route from Europe to Asia. The initial excitement quickly turned to difficulty. The Zamrin, ruler of Calicut, was unimpressed with the cheap European trade goods Da Gama offered, cloth, hats, ironware, compared to the gold and silver desired in the sophisticated Indian Ocean trade network dominated by Arab merchants. Da Gama's arrogance and misunderstanding of local customs caused friction. Arab traders, seeing the Portuguese as dangerous competitors, actively worked against them. After a tense and sometimes hostile 3 months, Da Gama secured only a small, uncertain cargo of spices. He departed Calicut in August 1498, but the voyage home was a nightmare. They missed the favorable monsoon, leading to a grueling 3-month crossing back to Africa. Scurvy ravaged the crew, many died, including Da Gama's brother Paulo. Only 2 ships and less than half the original crew made it back to Lisbon in July 1499. Despite the human cost and the modest cargo, the achievement was monumental. Da Gama was hailed as a hero. He had proven the sea route existed. The potential for direct access to the spice wealth of Asia was now a reality for Portugal. Da Gama's voyage opened the floodgates. Portugal moved with astonishing speed and aggression to seize control of the Indian Ocean trade. They weren't interested in just trading, they aimed for monopoly. In 1500, Pedro Alvarez Cabral led a large fleet to India. His voyage is famous for accidentally discovering Brazil, landing east of the Tordesillas line, which he claimed for Portugal before continuing east. When Cabral reached Calicut, tensions exploded. Arab merchants attacked the Portuguese factory, trading post. Cabral retaliated brutally, bombarding the city and capturing Arab merchant ships. This set the pattern. Portuguese power rested on naval supremacy and the willingness to use overwhelming violence. The next viceroy, Francisco de Almeida, established the policy of Estado de India, State of India, and focused on securing naval dominance. His strategy culminated in the decisive Battle of Gio in 1509, where a Portuguese fleet destroyed a combined fleet of Egyptian Mamluk, Ottoman Turkish, Gujarati, and Calicut forces. This victory shattered Muslim naval power in the western Indian Ocean and secured Portuguese control for decades. The true architect of Portuguese empire building, however, was Afonso de Albuquerque, who became governor in 1509. He had a grand strategic vision: control the choke points of the Indian Ocean trade. He realized that dominating key ports and straits, not vast territories, was the key to controlling the spice flow and taxing all other trade. His conquests were ruthless and strategic. Goa, 1510, captured from the Sultanate of Bijapur, Goa became the thriving capital of the Estado de India for centuries, a fortified city and administrative hub. Malacca, 1511, the wealthy sultanate controlling the vital strait between Malaya and Sumatra, the gateway to the Spice Islands, Moluccas, and China. Albuquerque's capture of Malacca gave Portugal control of this crucial passage. Hormuz, 1515, a fortress island at the entrance to the Persian Gulf, controlling trade routes to the Middle East. Securing Hormuz meant Portugal could choke off the traditional overland spice routes via the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, forcing trade onto their sea lanes. Albuquerque also sought Aden, to control the Red Sea entrance. And unsuccessfully attempted to capture Hormuz earlier, but his conquests established the core network. Portuguese ships, particularly the powerful, armed carracks, now patrolled the Indian Ocean. They enforced a system of cartazes, passes that all merchant ships were required to purchase. Ships without a Portuguese cartaz were subject to seizure and destruction. They established forts and factories at key points like Cochin, Cananore, Colombo, Sri Lanka, and later Macau, China, 1557, and Nagasaki, Japan, 1571. They aimed to divert the entire spice trade around Africa to Lisbon, cutting out Venice, Egypt, and the Arab middlemen. The wealth flowing into Lisbon was staggering, transforming Portugal into a major European power seemingly overnight. The Portuguese impact on the lands they encountered was profound and often devastating. Their arrival in the Indian Ocean was a violent shock to the established order. For centuries, the Indian Ocean had been a relatively open trading zone, dominated by Arab, Persian, Indian, Chinese, Malay, and East African merchants. Trade operated through networks of ports, sultanates, and empires, governed by complex customs, mutual interests, and local naval power. The Portuguese, with their powerful cannon-armed ships, disrupted this completely. They demanded monopolies, imposed their cartas system by force, attacked established merchant communities, especially Arab traders, and bombarded cities that resisted. They were seen as arrogant, violent interlopers. While they succeeded in diverting a significant portion of the spice trade around Africa, they never achieved a complete monopoly. Local powers adapted, smuggling flourished, and Arab, Gujarati, and later Dutch and English traders continued to operate. The violence and disruption caused by Portuguese actions, like the sacking of trading cities, created deep resentment. Their attempts to spread Christianity were often heavy-handed. Missionaries like Francis Xavier arrived in the 1540s, achieving some conversions, particularly in Goa and among coastal communities in India and the Spice Islands, but also facing resistance and persecution elsewhere, especially in Japan. Culturally, a fascinating, often complex, exchange occurred. Portuguese words entered languages across Asia and Africa. New foods were introduced both ways, chilies to Asia, Asian spices to Europe in unprecedented volume. Artistic styles blended, particularly in religious art in places like Goa, Indo-Portuguese, and Japan, Namban art. The Portuguese language became a lingua franca in many port cities. However, the darker side of the Portuguese presence was immense. The slave trade they pioneered along the African coast intensified and became a horrific transatlantic system under later European powers. Their brutal tactics, driven by greed and religious zeal, caused widespread suffering and destabilized regions. The wealth extracted from Asia and Africa flowed overwhelmingly back to Portugal, enriching the crown and nobility but not necessarily fostering broad-based development at home. The initial, almost miraculous era of discovery and daring navigation gave way to the often grim realities of imperial exploitation and the struggle to maintain a far-flung empire against rising rivals. Portugal's dominance in the East was spectacular but relatively short-lived. Maintaining such a vast, dispersed empire stretching from Brazil to Japan was an immense strain on a small nation with limited manpower and resources. The Estado de India was constantly under pressure, logistical nightmare. The sea voyage to India was incredibly long, 18 to 24 months round trip, dangerous, and costly. Ships were lost to storms, disease, scurvy killed thousands of sailors, and enemy action. Crews were hard to recruit and suffered horrific mortality rates. Supplying distant forts and ships was a constant challenge. Rising European rivals, Portugal's success attracted powerful enemies. Spain, united after 1580 in the Iberian Union, when the Portuguese crown fell to the Spanish king, brought Portugal into conflict with Spain's enemies, like the Dutch and English. These northern European powers, with faster, more maneuverable ships and powerful joint stock companies, Dutch East India Company, VOC, English East India Company, EIC, proved formidable competitors. The Dutch, in particular, waged relentless war on Portuguese holdings. They captured Malacca, 1641, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, 1650s, and key spice islands like the Moluccas. The English established footholds in India. Local resistance, Asian powers grew stronger and pushed back. The Ottomans challenged them in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. In the Persian Gulf, the Portuguese lost Hormuz to a combined Persian-English force in 1622. In East Africa, the Omani Arabs drove them out of key ports like Mombasa, capturing Fort Jesus in 1698 after a long siege. In Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate expelled all Europeans in 1639, closing the door on Portuguese trade there, though they retained Macau. Internal weakness, Portugal itself suffered from overextension. The vast wealth from the empire often flowed out to pay for imported goods and wars, rather than building domestic industries. The small population couldn't sustain the losses from constant warfare and emigration. After regaining independence from Spain in 1640, Portugal was weakened. By the mid-17th century, the Dutch and English had largely displaced Portugal as the dominant European powers in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. Portugal clung on to key territories, Goa, Daman, and Jio in India, until 1961, Macau, until 1999, parts of Timor, and crucially, its vast colony in Brazil, which became increasingly important, especially after the discovery of gold and diamonds there in the late 17th and 18th centuries. Brazil, not Asia, became the economic heart of the later Portuguese Empire. The legacy of the Portuguese Exploration Era is monumental and echoes through our globalized world. They were the true pioneers of global maritime exploration. Connecting the world, they proved the world was interconnected by sea. Da Gama's voyage linked Europe directly to Asia for the first time by ocean, ending the isolation of continents. They mapped vast stretches of previously unknown coastline in Africa, revealed the true shape of the South Atlantic, discovered Brazil, and opened sea routes to China and Japan. Birth of global trade, they established the first truly global trade networks. Spices, silks, and porcelain flowed to Europe, silver from the Americas, later, and European goods flowed east. This exchange transformed economies, diets, and cultures worldwide. Lisbon became Europe's first global city, a warehouse of the world. Age of imperialism, their model of establishing fortified coastal trading posts, Vitorias, and using naval power to control trade routes became the blueprint for European imperialism in Asia and Africa for centuries. The Estado de India was the first European colonial empire in Asia. Scientific revolution in navigation, their systematic advances in ship design, caravel, carrack, navigation, astrolabe, charts, understanding of winds and currents, and cartography laid the foundation for all subsequent oceanic exploration. Their voyages were feats of scientific observation and daring. Cultural exchange and collision, they initiated sustained contact between vastly different civilizations, European, African, Asian, and later American. This led to exchanges of knowledge, technology, food, chili peppers to Asia, potatoes and tomatoes to Europe, language, Portuguese loanwords globally, and religion, Catholicism spread to new continents. It also led to conflict, exploitation, and the tragic dawn of the transatlantic slave trade. Shaping the modern world, the Treaty of Tordesillas, dividing the world between Spain and Portugal, was a bold and arrogant attempt to impose order on global discovery, with lasting consequences for the colonization of the Americas. Brazil's Portuguese language and culture are direct results. Enduring presence, the Portuguese language, spoken by over 250 million people today, largely due to Brazil, is a living legacy of their maritime empire. Cities like Goa, Macau, Malacca, and Mombasa bear the architectural and cultural imprint of the Portuguese era. The Portuguese Exploration Era was a watershed moment in human history. Driven by a mix of national ambition, religious zeal, scientific curiosity, and sheer greed, this small nation on Europe's edge dared to challenge the boundaries of the known world. Their sailors faced unimaginable hardships and fears, driven by the vision of Prince Henry and the relentless pursuit of the sea route to the east. Their success opened the planet, ushered in the first age of globalization, and set in motion forces of connection, exchange, empire, and exploitation that shaped the modern world. They were the first to truly sail off the map, and in doing so, they changed the map forever.